Hello everybody, and welcome to the Element 14 webinar on the RoHS recast. We're going to give you a brief introduction to the RoHS 2 technical file requirements, which are new to the directive recast and fall in line with the CE Mark obligation. In this webinar, we hope to give you to clear up some of the ambiguity around the changes in the requirements of a manufacturer, and how the RoHS recast has been brought into line with the CE Mark. And we hope to be able to give you a high-level overview of the information you wish to retain, or you will want to retain as a manufacturer, and how you go about producing your technical file. So here is the contents of this webinar. As I just stated, we're going to give you an introduction to RoHS 2 and the new CE Mark requirements. We're going to build on the content of a CE Mark technical file under the RoHS 2 directive, and we're going to go into some of the detail on how you collect the information and what is acceptable in terms of presenting information in your technical file. So if we go to our first slide, the Restriction of Hazardous Substances Directive has been recast and is now part of the new legislative framework. You can find this in the Open Journal. If you search the web for the directive number, which is up there on the slide, you can read the documents relating to the directive, and that will give you an indication of where the new requirements have come from. The integration of RoHS into the CE Mark has a number of practical benefits. It clears up the ambiguity around the CE labelling, and whereas previously there were many iterations of a RoHS compliant mark, the green tick RoHS compliance for example, now all finished electronic products can only carry the CE Mark to show that they are RoHS compliant. Obviously this only applies to finished electronics, and we'll come on to that in some detail in the next slide, but basically it's important to understand is that your finished electronic products must now carry the CE Mark, and other RoHS logos are to be done away with. So if we move on and look at the scope of the RoHS directive, and the products that are deemed in scope are generally described in this indicative list you can see here. This is taken from Annex 1 of the directive, and it indicates the 11 groups which are used to describe products within the scope of RoHS 2. I'm just going to run through the 11 categories to give you some idea of the products that would be covered, and that hopefully will allow you to make your own decisions as to whether or not your product should be part of the CE Mark and will need a RoHS technical file. So under category 1, large household appliances, these are domestic white goods, things like fridges, freezers, electric stoves, washing machines, those type of household appliances. Under category 2, small household appliances, they are smaller domestic items, things like toasters, deep fat fryers, vacuum cleaners, hair dryers, these types of smaller domestic products. Under category 3, IT and telecommunication equipment, this is quite a broad category. So computers and computer peripherals, they may be desktop or laptop, they're in this category. The peripherals would include things like mice, keyboard, other things you may plug into your computer to help you interact with it. Mobile phones, cordless phones, printers, tablet PCs, and dev kits, which is an interesting example, and has only recently been clarified by the European Commission. Category 4 is consumer equipment, so these are things that you would often find in your home. Again, things like TVs, video players, DVD players, hi-fi stereos, all these sorts of domestic consumer equipment. Under Category 5, we've got things like lamps, devices for controlling light in domestic and industrial settings. Under Category 6, electric and electronic tools. These are products that you would typically find in the garden shed or other such similar areas. Power drills, soldering stations, electric saws, electrical garden equipment, things like that. Under Category 7, toys, leisure and sports equipment, we've got electrical toys, remote control cars, things like that. Sports equipment may include things for monitoring sports performance or electrical sports equipment that you may use to exercise. Under Category 8, medical devices. These have previously been exempt and continue to be exempt up until the 22nd of July 2014. There's a further exemption granted to in vitro medical devices, and that is up until the 22nd of July 2016. The dates are up there on the slide, so that makes that quite clear. Under Category 9, we've got monitoring and control equipment, again previously exempt. The exemption for non-industrial products will cease in 2014 on the 22nd of July, and the industrial versions of your monitoring and control products will be exempt until 2017, again the 22nd of July. Moving on to Category 10, we've got automatic dispensers. These have typically been described as things like vending machines, hot drinks machines, other types of vending products. And then Category 11, which there is some ambiguity over what this will exactly cover, but it's described in the directive as EEE electrical and electronic equipment not covered by specific categories above. And then this, because of the ambiguity that needs to be cleared up, it will be exempt until the 23rd of July 2019. So expect some updates on that. So moving on, hopefully we've kind of identified which types of products will need to carry the CE mark and have the technical file. We're going to dive into some of the detail now on how you go and build your technical file, what types of things you'd be expecting to see in there, and we've broken this down into two steps. So you've kind of got the first thing you want to have there in your technical file is the general description of the product, the general product description, and then we'll move on to some of the documentation you would expect to collect against the materials in that general product description. So first of all, the first step in your technical file construction is to create a general product description. This is not an exhaustive list, or by any means a tick list that you must include all of these things here. These are some recommendations as to how you might accurately describe your product in the technical file. So first of all, you could probably go with some photos. That's a really good way of doing it, because it's really easy to identify the product from photos. Internal and external photos are good. That means that anybody inspecting the file could quite easily visually recognize the product. A bill of materials, or BOM, that's simply a list of all of the components included in your product. Remember that the directive states that all homogeneous materials must be compliant. So your BOM may typically include just the electronic components, but you must have a description of the other materials there, so fastenings and solders and glues and encasings. All of these things must be included. You may want to include some marketing or advertising literature, though this isn't necessary for a RoHS technical file. This is because it just helps to identify the product, and if you're producing these products to go with producing this literature to go with your product, it may be worthwhile sticking that in there because it's an easy win. Similarly with the user instructions, that can also be a good source of information to describe your product. You should include a schematic or a CAD layout for the product. If your product falls under some of the other CE directives, you will generally have to have this in your technical file anyway, so there's no harm in including it in your RoHS technical file. A block diagram of the workings of the product, so that's simply a function, an overview of the function of the product. So if there are several sub-assemblies within the electronic workings of your product, for example, you may want to describe how they interact with each other and their function. And then this is quite an important one, an identification of the RoHS categories, which was on the slide two slides ago. That this simply shows which category of RoHS your product falls into, and you've identified being pertinent to your product. So then, moving on, the content of the technical file, you need to then put against the product description some documentation for the material or the parts or the sub-assemblies, depending on how you've described your product, how you've broken it down. Each of the products, it may be the list that you use for your BOM or the parts and the sub-assemblies, as I say, must have their RoHS status confirmed. So let's say, for example, you have a BOM that has 10 resistors in it. Each of those resistors, if they're of different values or different manufacturers, for example, should have a statement against their RoHS compliance. And the statement you make can take the form of three, or can take three different forms, depending on your feeling as the manufacturer and the responsible person for the RoHS compliance of this product. So the first and probably easiest statement or RoHS status confirmation you can make against these components is a supplier declaration. So if you have bought or procured your parts or sub-assemblies from a supplier, you can take a supplier declaration and link that in your technical file to the part or the sub-assembly that it pertains to. If you want to go a step further, and we'll move on to the reasons why you might want to do that on the next slide, you can go to a material declaration. So again, taking the list of components as an example, you could give a complete material breakdown of all of the constituent materials in your resistors or capacitors, etc. And that would then show to somebody inspecting your technical file that there is none of the restricted substances present. And then the third very, very detailed approach you can go to is a test analysis of the components and sub-assemblies. And when we've given the EN standard you can use to do that, which is 62321, basically that's a test procedure for chemical, I think, analysis of the sub-assemblies and components, and this gives you a complete material analysis, and that will flag up if any of the materials contain any of the restricted substances. So going back to the previous slide, the argument you make against the RoHS compliance of each of the components or sub-assemblies in your finished electronics is basically down to the risk that you see in making those statements. So, for example, if you are very confident that your supplier is reputable and the components you've purchased from them are subject to a rigorous Q&A process, you can use that to say, I'm happy that the declaration I've got from my manufacturer is good and solid and reliable, and I don't see any risk in using that declaration in my technical file. If, on the other hand, you have some concern, that may be from past experience or simply the impression you get from your supplier, you may want to go to the material declaration, and that is a more rigorous and stringent declaration from your supplier, and it requires them to list the content of their components. And then again, if you go to the third step, which is really kind of the belt and braces approach, if you really have very little confidence in a declaration or a material content declaration from your supplier, then you may want to go to third-party testing yourself. And the EN number, the EN standard we've provided on the previous slide, is the best way of doing that. Remember, it's the manufacturer's liability to meet RoHS 2. So if the components you're using in your finished electronics are likely to jeopardize your RoHS compliance, it's your responsibility to ensure that you're happy with that risk. And that is really the crux of meeting the RoHS 2 requirements from a technical file point of view. So hopefully that's given you an overview, a brief overview of the requirements for a technical file. Understand there'll probably be countless questions, so if you feel you need to get some more information or you've got some comments on the content of this webinar, please drop us a line. Global legislation at Element 14 is a regularly monitored email address, and there are also guides and snippets of the latest happenings in the legislative world from element14.com/legislation. Please sign up to the community and come and join the discussions. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you again soon.